Imagine you're dying of thirst. In front of you are two pools of water. One looks clean, the other looks disgusting. Easy choice, right? But here's the problem. Water can look perfectly clean and still contain things capable of making you sick. Ancient humans couldn't see microscopic pathogens. They couldn't test water. So how could they possibly know where it was safer to drink? The answer isn't that ancient humans always knew. They didn't. Instead, they learned to recognize clues that could reduce the risk. One obvious clue was the water source itself. A flowing stream and a stagnant puddle weren't exactly the same environment. But flowing water wasn't automatically safe. Clear water wasn't automatically safe either. Nature didn't provide guarantees. So instead of judging only the water, experienced humans could pay attention to what was happening around it. Animals could reveal where water existed. Following tracks or watching wildlife could lead thirsty humans toward a source. But just like food, an animal drinking something didn't prove that the same water was harmless for humans. The safest clue may have been much simpler. Someone in your group already knew this place. A reliable spring, river, or seasonal water source could become part of the group's mental map of the landscape. So ancient humans weren't walking water detectors. They survived by observing, remembering, learning from experience, and teaching each other. Then humans gained another tool: fire. Heating water could reduce some biological dangers, but when people began doing this regularly is much harder to know. This doesn't mean every prehistoric camp routinely boiled drinking water. Archaeological evidence can't give us such a simple story. For much of human history, choosing where to collect water may have mattered just as much as changing the water afterward. And finding water itself required knowledge. Valleys, springs, rivers, vegetation, and animal movement could all provide clues. In a dry landscape, unusually green vegetation could tell an experienced traveler something important. Water might be nearby. Tracks could offer another clue. Animals needed water too, and their movement could sometimes lead humans toward it. But seeing an animal drink wasn't a guarantee. What another species tolerated wasn't automatically harmless for humans. A water source your group had used successfully before carried something an unknown pool didn't. Experience. Remember the tree, remember the rocks, remember the valley. These landmarks could help turn water into part of a mental map. But yesterday's water source wasn't necessarily tomorrow's. Seasonal changes could transform or even remove familiar water. Knowing several sources could make the difference between wandering blindly and moving through a landscape with a plan. And just like food, children didn't have to discover every water source themselves. Experienced people could show them. A spring discovered years earlier could still help someone who wasn't even born when the group first found it. None of this made ancient humans perfect water experts. People could still encounter contamination they couldn't see and sometimes become sick. But repeated experience could change behavior. A questionable source could be avoided, while familiar sources became part of shared knowledge. And this is the key. Ancient humans weren't choosing between safe and dangerous. They were often choosing between different levels of uncertainty. A stream could look perfect where you stood, but what was happening farther upstream could matter too. Mud, animal activity, stagnant areas, strange smells, the surroundings could provide warnings even when the water itself looked ordinary. An unpleasant smell could make avoiding a source an easy decision, but water without a smell still wasn't guaranteed harmless. That's what made water tricky. Some dangers were completely invisible. Your eyes and nose could only tell you so much. So experience could matter more than appearance. A familiar source used repeatedly was information, not a guarantee, but useful evidence. One person remembered the spring. Another remembered when it dried up. Someone else knew another source beyond the hills. Put those memories together, and the group suddenly knew far more about the landscape than any single person. And when water became scarce, knowing where to go next could shape how people moved through the landscape. A child following that journey wasn't just walking. They were learning landmarks they might depend on years later.
Eventually, that child could become the person leading someone else back to the exact same place. That's when finding water becomes more than individual survival. It becomes knowledge that can outlive the person who discovered it. And eventually, heating water offered another way to reduce certain biological risks when people had the means and knowledge to do it. Still, prehistoric humans had no perfect safety test. Their real advantage was reducing uncertainty whenever they could. So how did ancient humans know which water was safe? They didn't always know. They observed the landscape, remembered reliable places, learned from experience, and most importantly, learned from each other. But knowing one reliable water source created another problem. What happened when there wasn't any? Suddenly, remembering yesterday's water wasn't enough. Humans needed clues that could lead them somewhere new. In a dry landscape, greener vegetation could be worth investigating. Plants need water too. The shape of the land could provide clues as well. Water naturally collects and moves through particular parts of a landscape. Sometimes the clue wasn't water at all. It might simply be footprints heading repeatedly in the same direction. If thirsty animals kept traveling the same route, following from a distance could sometimes lead humans toward water. And after hours of searching, seeing water must have brought enormous relief. Except finding water and trusting water were two different problems. Before focusing on the water itself, the surroundings could reveal information about the source. Flowing water might sometimes be preferable to stagnant water, but movement alone couldn't make contamination disappear. And the clearest water could hide the hardest danger of all, the things human eyes simply couldn't see. Without microscopes or chemical tests, experience became incredibly valuable. What happened the last time people used this source? And again, no single human needed to know every spring, river, or seasonal pool. The group could combine what everyone remembered. Put those memories together, and an apparently empty landscape could become a mental map filled with possible water. So ancient humans didn't need a magical ability to detect perfect water. They needed something more realistic: clues, experience, memory, and people who could teach them where to look. Knowing where water might be meant humans didn't always have to search blindly. They could move toward places remembered by the group. A strange rock, a bend in the valley, or one recognizable tree could become more useful than any written sign. Find the water once, remember the route, and the next journey could become far less mysterious.
And eventually, the person who once followed someone else could become the one showing the next generation. Information could also move between people. A useful water location didn't necessarily have to remain one person's secret. The problem was that nature didn't stay still. Rainfall changed, rivers shifted, pools dried, familiar places could become unfamiliar again. So knowledge couldn't simply be memorized forever. Humans also needed flexibility when the old answers stopped working. A new landscape meant starting the process again. Observe, compare, remember, and learn from what happened. And sometimes the clues weren't enough. Ancient humans could still make mistakes because many waterborne dangers were invisible. But when bad experiences repeatedly followed a particular source, people could change where they collected water. And now, a child could avoid that same uncertainty without personally repeating every mistake. Notice the pattern? It's almost identical to food. Observation became experience, experience became memory, and memory became shared knowledge. Our greatest advantage wasn't knowing exactly what nature would do. It was being able to learn when nature surprised us. So return to our thirsty human. 2 water sources, no laboratory, and no perfect way to know what he can't see. How did ancient humans know which water was safe? Sometimes they didn't. But observation, familiar sources, experience, memory, and shared knowledge helped them make better choices. That's the important difference. Ancient humans weren't eliminating risk, they were learning how to reduce it. A familiar spring wasn't magically safe, but years of experience gave the group information an unknown source couldn't. Soon, rivers, springs, valleys, trees, and rocks could become pieces of an enormous map stored entirely in memory. And children could learn that map long before they ever had to search for water alone. Years later, the person who once followed could become the person everyone else followed. That's what made shared knowledge so powerful. useful information could survive longer than the person who first discovered it. Of course, nature could always change. A familiar river could shrink, a pool could disappear, a new journey could begin. And when that happened, humans repeated what they did best: observe, explore, remember, adapt. Food and water seem like different survival problems, but humans solved both using the same extraordinary advantage: each other. One person's experience could become another person's warning, and eventually a child's lesson. So put our thirsty human back between those two water sources. He still can't see every danger, but he's not making that decision alone. Generations of experience are helping him choose. Ancient humans didn't always know which water was safe. They learned which sources had worked before, watched their surroundings, remembered, and taught. Their greatest survival tool wasn't perfect instinct. It was the ability to turn experience into knowledge, and knowledge into culture. But finding water created another question. What happened when there wasn't any?